Now we'll move on to our second speaker for today, which is Dr. Lake. Dr. Jud Lake is a professor of preaching and Adventist studies in the School of Religion at Southern Adventist University, where he has taught for 25 years. He is the author of numerous articles and several books, including Ellen White Under Fire, and A Nation in God's Hand, Ellen White in the Civil War. He will be presenting on the plurality of unfallen worlds and Ellen White and extraterrestrial. He will have approximately 40 minutes, so around 11:40 to present, after which we will transition to our respondent. All right, so it seems Dr. Lake is with us. As of right now, we're going to do a short prayer, and then he will proceed with his presentation on plurality of unfallen worlds, Ellen White, and extraterrestrial. At this moment, bow your head for a word prayer. Gracious God, we are so grateful that your mercy endures until now. We are able to gather together, though it be on Zoom, to hear further research of which you have provided your wisdom for us to understand. We pray as this presentation is going to go, that our heart is willing to receive your truth and your truth alone. Be with Dr. Lake. In Jesus' name we humbly pray. Amen. Without further ado, please welcome Dr. Jud Lake. Enjoy.
Okay. There we go. Am I on now?
Yes, sir.
Okay, sorry about that. I must have joined incorrectly.
It's all right.
So, all right. Glad to share with you. I think, as we all know, extraterrestrials is a hot topic. Recent documents from the government, redacted although they may be, it's certainly turning the attention once again to UFOs and the possibility of life out in the universe. And so it's certainly an interesting topic, and Ellen White has some fascinating things to say about that. This paper is really just the beginning of a discussion. It's really a survey of a vast landscape. As I was looking at the material, I kept cutting out more and more and more and more and more material. I realized I had to just leave out the contemporary debate and focus on it historically. So that's what my focus is. So I guess for like many of us, the biggest challenge was deciding what to leave out. So because of the time limit, I will parts of the paper summarize it, because it's certainly longer than 40 minutes to present, as many of our papers are. So let's begin. Plurality of Unfallen Worlds, Ellen White and Extraterrestrials. Plurality of worlds, known also as cosmic pluralism, is the historical term that describes the belief that the universe is permeated with worlds circling their respective suns, and that they are populated with sentient, intelligent beings. It is the term from which derives the 20th century concept of extraterrestrial life, and has a long and rich history that began in ancient Greece and reached its zenith in the 19th century. One scholar dubbed the latter half of the 19th century as the golden age of the idea of plurality. Thus, Ellen White's lifetime was one in which plurality of worlds was a pervasive theme in the writings of scientists, philosophers, preachers, and theologians. Her comments about inhabitants from other worlds are most interesting when read in this historical context. White's frequent references in her writings to innumerable unfallen worlds throughout the universe has captured the attention of those who write about the extraterrestrial life debate. Historian Michael Crow, for example, mentions Ellen White in his comprehensive The Extraterrestrial Life Debate, 1750 to 1900, as one who, quote, provided her church with what few congregations can claim, a theology incorporating extraterrestrial beings, unquote. He is correct, for this is precisely what she did over a period of 60 years, from her first view of another world and its inhabitants published in 1849 to her more theologically sophisticated references to the unfallen worlds in later years. She remained consistent in her doctrine of pluralism. The examination of Ellen White's theological pluralism can be considered part of a new branch of theology identified as exotheology, sometimes called astrotheology, which is the theological reflection on issues related to the existence of extraterrestrial intelligence. Issues such as sin in the universe, multiple incarnations, and alien conversion are topics of vigorous discussion, but beyond the scope of this paper. Those are issues that would have been so fascinating to engage with Ellen White on, but that'll be another study. The objective here is to determine the purpose of pluralism in White's writings and to understand its distinctive features in relationship to other religious writers on pluralism in the 19th century. To accomplish this objective, I will first provide the historical context for White's pluralism, and second, set forth several distinctive features of her pluralism through engagement with the other contemporary writers on pluralism. So first, the historical context. The origins of plurality. The history of plurality of worlds that finds its origins in the pre-Socratic atomist philosophers has been documented exhaustively by historians of the movement such as Michael J. Crow and Stephen Dick, so I will only summarize it here. After its debut in the atomists, plurality of worlds was eclipsed by Aristotelian cosmology with its earth-centered universe until the middle years of the European Renaissance. The Copernican revolution, with its sun-centered solar system, opened the door for plurality of worlds to eventually return and capture the imagination of scientists, philosophers, theologians during the 17th and 18th centuries. Intellectual historian Arthur Lovejoy suggested 5 theses that captured the innovations of the heliocentric cosmology that was generally accepted by the end of the 17th century and continued into the 19th century. And this is classic pluralism here, these 5 theses. Number 1, the planets in our solar system are inhabited by intelligent beings. 2, the geocentric medieval universe was displaced with an infinitely unlimited universe. And 3, the fixed stars are suns like ours and are surrounded by planetary systems. 4, the other worlds in these systems are inhabited by conscious beings. And 5, the universe contains an infinite number of solar systems. Those 5 theses would continue throughout Ellen White's lifetime. In addition to the Copernican revolution, the principle of plenitude was a factor in the pluralistic thinking of the time. This principle advocated the idea that the deity doesn't waste anything and that whatever he creates will multiply and flourish with life throughout the universe. This idea was especially influential in theological writers on plurality, and you can see elements of this even in Ellen White's theological plurality. Thomas Paine, The Age of Reason. In 1794, the English-born American revolutionary and avowed deist Thomas Paine published his book, The Age of Reason, and sent shockwaves through the Christian community. Therein, he argued that the Christian view of creation and the fall was incompatible with the plurality of worlds doctrine. The two beliefs cannot be held together in the same mind, he argued. Reason is a gift from the deity, and humanity is endowed with the ability to find scientific truth without appeal to the Bible. Paine had immersed himself in the astronomy of the 17th and 18th centuries and made his understanding of science the basis of his deism. For him, the mythical biblical story contradicted human reason. Plurality of worlds thus became his club to bludgeon Christianity. After describing the vastness of the cosmos and, quote, the cheerful idea of a society of worlds, unquote, he wrote, "From whence could arise the solitary and strange conceit that the Almighty, who had millions of worlds equally dependent on his protection, should quit the care of all the rest and come to die in our world because they say one man and one woman had eaten an apple? And on the other hand, are we to suppose that every world in the boundless creation had an Eve, an apple, a serpent, and a redeemer? In this case, the person who is irreverently called the Son of God, and sometimes God himself, would have nothing else to do than to travel from world to world in an endless succession of death with scarcely a momentary interval of life. This bleak caricature of Christianity has been dubbed the planet-hopping Christ." Historian Robert Paul summed up the significant influence of the Age of Reason. Paine's unrelenting attack on Christianity, the support he marshaled for his views in terms of the plurality of worlds in astronomy, and his claims of deism generally all entered early 19th century American thought. And in fact, most of the theological writers of the early 19th century, when it came to pluralism, they were responding to Paine's attacks. So that brings us to the 19th century. The Age of Reason sold well in Britain and especially America, and drew a multitude of strong responses. In fact, one historian says it was probably the most widely read book in the latter 18th century. The United States President John Adams sympathized with Paine, as did other noteworthy figures, such as the transcendentalist Ralph Waldo Emerson and Mark Twain. Paine's planet-hopping Christ, however, drew numerous critical responses from Christian writers, and these are covered in Crow. Our interest here is on those who, in their defense of Christian pluralism, articulated similar themes found in Ellen White's pluralist comments. And I'm just going to summarize this here because of time, but Andrew Fuller, well-known Baptist theologian of that time, wrote his book, The Gospel and Its Own Witness, in 1799. He responded to Paine and defended a Christian view of plurality and natural theology understanding. Timothy Dwight, the president of Yale University from 1795 to 1817, every student that went through Yale University heard a series of sermons that he preached every year. And pluralism was very much a part of that, theological pluralism. And so every student that graduated from Yale University in those years got a strong dose of pluralism from Dwight's sermons. The most significant response to Paine was a Scottish church statesman and preacher, Thomas Chalmers, who in 1817 preached a series of 7 sermons later published as a series of discourses on the Christian revelation viewed in connection with the modern astronomy. This series was enormously popular and had a wide influence in Scotland and to a lesser degree in America. Plurality of inhabited worlds was shown to be in harmony with the Christian faith. Paine's numerous deaths of Christ were unnecessary. Chalmers was most eloquent in extolling God's creative power displayed in the inhabited universe. And as you read Chalmers, it's quite surprising and amazing how close in some aspects he comes to Ellen White's thinking. But I'll point out there are some distinct differences here in a little bit. Another evangelical pluralist, fellow Scotsman of Chalmers, was Thomas Dick, who went beyond just defending Paine and went beyond Chalmers and made his whole career writing about extraterrestrials. And he said some interesting things that I'll touch on in a little bit. And he was quite influential because Adventists read him. Loughborough cites him in his book on church history. Another, let me just say here, these 4 Calvinist evangelical pluralists are especially important for our study of Ellen White's pluralism, since her theology is cast in the larger evangelical framework. Now, outside of the evangelical Christian community, you have 2 basic groups I'm going to touch on very briefly here. First, the spiritualist. You've got the founding spiritualist, Emanuel Swedenborg, and in the 18th century. Then in 19th century America, you have Andrew Jackson Davis, who laid the philosophical foundation for spiritualism in America, distinct from Katie and Maggie Fox, the more popular form of spiritualism. And also Thomas Lake Harris, a Baptist turned universalist turned spiritualist, was also a well-known spiritualist writer who combined the Bible and spiritualist ideas. But all 3 of these spiritualists spoke of their visionary journeys to other planets in our solar system and beyond, and they spoke with beings, these spirits, on these other planets. I'll share some things that they said in a moment, but they're important because of that. And of course, Joseph Smith, founder of the Mormons, was also deeply into pluralism and followed Lovejoy's basic thesis, but went beyond that and developed a cosmology and eschatology of his very own making that was unique and distinct to him. Later in the century, the latter half, William Whewell, who became well known, who assaulted Christian pluralism and disagreed and said that there's no intelligent life anywhere in the universe except on this world. God is focused only on this planet, kind of going back to the old cosmology of the medieval ages, but in a different approach. He had 20 books that were responding to him. Pluralism was pervasive during this time, and over 50 journal publications, mostly disagreeing with him. One of the more notable negative responses to Whewell came from Sir William Brewster, who in his book More Worlds Than One argued that not only is there life throughout the universe, but there's life on the moon. And he said there's life on the sun. And he said that the intelligent life in the sun is highly intelligent than all the rest. So he went to that extreme. And interestingly, early Mormon cosmology included the belief that the sun was inhabited. The most influential response to Whewell, however, was Richard Anthony Proctor, who in 1870 published his Other Worlds Than Ours, Plurality of Worlds Studied Under the Light of Scientific Research. Proctor was a British astronomer who became the most widely read author on the pluralist debate between 1870 and 1890. Other Worlds, his book, Other Worlds, became immensely popular and went through 29 printings through the remainder of that century and early into the next. The book was written against the backdrop of the Whewell-Brewster debate and took a mediating position. Proctor supported Brewster on plurality of inhabited worlds, but rejected some of his extreme ideas about life on the moon and the sun. He concluded that some of our solar system planets are not favorable to life, but that possibly Venus and Uranus and Neptune could support life. By 1875, Proctor had moved away from the possibility of life on the planets in our solar system and beyond and took a Darwinian approach to pluralism, that life was evolving on other planets. Now, according to Tim Poyer, of the vice director of the Ellen G. White estate, the 1871 American edition of Proctor's Other Worlds was in Ellen White's library. He and I dialogued on email about this, and he told me that, quote, among the books C.C. Chrysler sold to Ellen G. White for her library in 1913. Among that, of course, was Proctor's Other Worlds. So because the book arrived in her library so late in her life, Poyer doesn't think that she may have ever consulted it. And that would make sense that it arrived later in her life. I conjecture possibly that maybe Chrysler would have shared some of the things in Proctor. I'll get to that in a moment. Again, no evidence for that. Such was the pluralist milieu for Ellen White's visions of intelligent life in other worlds and pluralist statements. There were, of course, many other writers than the ones mentioned above, but this sampling provides the necessary context for an analysis of White's Plurality of Unfallen Worlds. So now we come to Ellen White's Plurality of Unfallen Worlds. Ellen White never formally set out to prove the existence of extraterrestrial intelligence on other planets. She assumed from her visions a universe that expressed the principle of plenitude and plugged the idea of inhabited worlds into her larger theme of the great controversy. Plurality of worlds was thus not a major theme in her writings, but rather an important supporting theme, mentioned about 1,700 times throughout her writings. The inhabitants of other worlds occurred strategically as an important connecting link in her system of thought. Several preliminary issues will provide a framework for our discussion of White's Plurality of Inhabited Worlds. First, by the time of her first vision on the planets, Plurality of Worlds, and this was mainly on the planets, she claimed no knowledge of any details about astronomy. In 1846, for example, after her first visionary view of other planets, she related to Joseph Bates in response to a question that she had no, quote, no recollection of ever looking into an astronomy book. And James White also noted that she had never read from other books. Interestingly, on astronomy, her later descriptions of the heavens became more, or I should say slightly, astronomically sophisticated, yet always theologically focused, such as when she described the universe as composed of, quote, suns and stars and systems, all in their appointed order circling the throne of deity, and described God's hand as guiding the planets in their circuit of the heavens and keeping them marshaled in perfect order and remaining in position in their orderly march through the heavens. It is possible that she read from some astronomical literature. There's plenty of it circulating in the day. Pluralism had filtered down to the common folk during that time. So it's possible that she read from some astronomical literature that sharpened her expression of what she had seen in vision, and that her visions alone broadened her view of the universe, which leads to the next point. Second, Ellen White based her teaching of plurality on her visions. Although there were a few depictions of the heavens assumed the Copernican principle of sun-centered solar systems and the principle of plenitude, she would refer to millions of worlds, in the framework of the five-fold love-joy scheme noted above, she apparently based her astronomical understanding more on what she had seen in vision than on what she may have read. Furthermore, all her statements about other worlds are theologically rather than scientifically framed. That is, instead of discussing the worlds from an astronomical perspective, she framed her plurality statements in such theological themes as the creativity of God, the power of God, the great love of God, and of course, the great controversy theme. Third, several of Ellen White's pluralist ideas are not original with her, which raises the issue of literary borrowing. Pluralism and astronomical information were readily available in books, newspapers, and almanacs of the time. Did she read from any of this material as suggested above? Did she read any of the major evangelical pluralist writings, such as Chalmers, Dwight, or Dick, and incorporate their ideas into her pluralism? Although it is not my intention in this paper to give a detailed analysis of this issue, my research has found that she read little, if any, from these authors. That's just by comparing the language and vocabulary and syntax and so forth. There may be some ideas that are similar, but the language is different. If she had read from them and used some of their ideas, her understanding of pluralism was uniquely her own. A good contemporary illustration is Joseph Smith, who has been accused of borrowing his pluralist ideas from Thomas Dick. Scholars Eric Paul, Robert Paul, and Edward T. Jones, Mormon scholars, have demonstrated that Smith's thinking was so different from Dick that the two can hardly be compared. Smith's pluralist thinking had some similarities with other pluralists, but there are enough differences in his pluralism that his pluralism should be considered unique to him. The same is true of Ellen White, even though she and Smith had obviously very different pluralist views. Fourth, it should be noted that in the case of Plurality of Worlds, Ellen White was more in harmony with the Calvinist pluralist than with her theological mentor, John Wesley, who said of the, quote, supposition of plurality of worlds, unquote, that, quote, the more I consider that supposition, the more I doubt of it, unquote. In response to the challenge of innumerable worlds placed throughout immensity by divine wisdom, Wesley responded, I have so high an opinion of the divine wisdom that I believe no child of man can fathom it. It is our wisdom to be very wary how we pronounce concerning things which we have not seen. Ellen White followed Wesley in many ways theologically, as we all know, but on this subject, she followed her visions. Now we come to the 1849 vision in which she encountered a being from another world. We began with a report of this encounter, first published as a part of a broadside dated January 31, 1849. The Lord has given me a view of other worlds, she announced, and proceeded to describe her experience. Wings were given me, and an angel attended me from the city to a place that was bright and glorious. The grass in the place was living green, and the birds there warbled a sweet song. The inhabitants of the place were of all sizes. They were noble, majestic, and lovely. The description given here is reminiscent of the spiritualists discussed above, Swedenborg, Davis, and Harris, who, based on their visions, described in detail the beautiful scenery, peaceful atmosphere, and fascinating beings on the planets they had visited. Davis, for example, reported that the beings on Saturn have bodies like us with very high and long heads and are social with strong convictions. The beings on Jupiter, he said, do not walk erect, but assume an inclined position, frequently using their hands and arms in walking, the lower extremities being rather shorter than the arms, according to our standard of proportion. Harris met with Christian Platonic philosophers on the planet Mercury and noted that the beings from a star called Cassiopeia feed chiefly upon the aromas of exquisite flowers. White, however, can be seen in the quote, or as can be seen in the quote, gives no such details about this world and its inhabitants. Neither does she name the world. She simply refers to it as a place, which suggests that she may not have espoused the first thesis in the Lovejoy scheme that there's life on planets in our solar system. In this one and only encounter with beings from other worlds, in contrast to the three spiritualists, White is interested in the spiritual and theological perspective of these beings. Note her next words. They bore the expressed image of Jesus, and their countenance beamed with holy joy, expressive of the freedom and happiness of the place. I asked one of them why they were so much more lovely than those on the earth. The reply was, we have lived in strict obedience to the commandments of God and have not fallen by disobedience like those on the earth. Then I saw two trees. One looked much like the tree of life in the city. The fruit of both looked beautiful, but of one they could not eat. They had power to eat of both, but were forbidden to eat of one. Then my attending angel said to me, none in this place have tasted of the forbidden tree, but if they should eat, they should fall. These holy beings are clearly untainted by sin and manifest the express image of Jesus, a reference in the King James Version of Hebrews 1:3 that described Jesus as being in the express image of his Father's person. Their appearance is different from that of the people on earth because they have obeyed the commandments of God and are thus not fallen. This world is two trees. Its inhabitants were commanded not to eat of the fruit from one of them. The imagery here, of course, recalls the Genesis 3 narrative, the fall of Adam and Eve. Could the unfallen beings on this planet be representative of the other worlds throughout God's universe? Were there possibly Adam and Eve's who did not eat of the forbidden fruit on their planet? That's a rhetorical question at this point. This vision evidently provided a theological foundation for White's understanding, as she later referred to the other worlds throughout the universe as unfallen worlds. Another part of the vision, White was taken into a world which had 7 moons and encountered good old Enoch, who had been translated. The rest of the depiction shows Enoch with his vestures of victory, purity, holiness, and a crown that shone brighter than the sun, enjoying his visit to this planet during his time away from the heavenly city. The lesson of the entire account was to, and this is important because I'll actually end with this, the lesson of the entire account was to encourage White that, if faithful, she, like Enoch, from the earth, will, with the 144,000, enjoy the privilege of visiting all the worlds and viewing the handiwork of God. This vision, though never referred to specifically again in White's writings, was continuously present as a foundation for her later statements about other worlds. The theological ideas expressed in her conversation with inhabitant from this world remained consistent in her pluralism for the rest of her life. Now, the next section is where I discuss Proctor's book and how his scientific arguments really support White at the time. But I also show how he provides a balance and a corrective to some of the more extreme ideas expressed by Thomas Dick. Thomas Dick had calculated that billions of people live on Jupiter and another set of billions of people live on Saturn. Proctor already had discovered and was explaining scientifically that most likely no intelligent life could exist on Jupiter or Saturn. But he does give some interesting scientific support for that. And I want to pick it up here. It's noteworthy that although Ellen White most likely never read from Proctor, 30 years after her 1849 vision of conversing with beings from another world, she broadened her pluralist language. In 1881, for example, she spoke of unnumbered worlds throughout immensity. And in 1888, the unnumbered worlds throughout the vast realms of space. Whether she was intentional in doing it or not, this language drew reader attention away from our solar system to the numberless worlds that God controls throughout the universe. It is possible, although there is no evidence that I'm aware of, that, as I pointed out before, that C.C. Chrysler may have shared with Ellen White what he had read in Proctor's book. I find it hard to believe that if he gave her that book, if he would have read it himself because of what she had said about unfallen worlds and the universe, that he would have had a dialogue with her about it. But I have absolutely no evidence for that I'm aware of. And I don't know if there is any evidence for that I'm aware of. If somebody ever finds something, I would love to know about it, if they ever had a dialogue about that. It is, if she was aware of what Proctor had said, this would have made her aware of the problem of life on our solar system planets, as well as provide scientific support for her view of the heavenly universe teeming with intelligent life. Over the next 30 years, White's comments about unfallen worlds were spread throughout her periodical articles, books, and manuscripts, in addition to the Conflict of the Age series. To keep this discussion manageable for this paper, I will organize representative statements under 3 themes, and there's certainly more that could be discussed. These are themes that she and the others before her applied in their pluralist statements. This approach will show the common ideas among these writers, as well as White's distinctive emphasis in her pluralism. And as I look at what time I have left, there's no way I'll be able to cover all of these, so I'm just going to very briefly summarize. I want to focus on the last major section, which is on the great controversy theme. But the first one is sin restricted to our world, that this is the only planet with sin. C.S. Lewis' concept of quarantine, this planet quarantined from the rest of the worlds. Other writers, a number of the pluralist writers that I mentioned before, the evangelical writers, particularly Chalmers, they and others, they had a concept of this world being the place where sin abides and the rest of the universe is sinless, although Chalmers was back and forth on that. He wasn't really sure. Andrew Fuller was quite clear that this sin is only on this planet and it doesn't abide out in the universe. And I even bring some others in. Poet Friedrich Gottlieb Klopstock, in his classic poem Der Messias, portrays a Christocentric sinless universe. Very interesting. And Andrew Leach, a Baptist, spoke eloquently about this world being the only discordant note in all of God's universe. But Ellen White was very consistent in putting it in theological context of the great controversy. I should add that Joseph Smith, and I have that paragraph here that I'll just say a brief word about, but Smith believed that sin had reached the rest of the worlds and the earth was the most sinful. And the other section is the value of this world in the vast cosmos, which is in contrast to Paine, saying that this world is not really that important, that the biblical story of the Adam and Eve and so forth, redemption on this planet, is just a myth. And so they responded to that by saying that God does care for this planet. Chalmers in particular said some beautiful things that would resonate with some of what Ellen White said, but she put it more beautifully than all of these writers in her parable of the lost sheep. Her comments on that in Christ's Object Lesson, she says, this world is but an atom in the vast dominions over which God presides. Yet this little fallen world, the one lost sheep, is more precious in his sight than are the 99 that went not astray from the fold. For this he left the sinless worlds on high, the 99 that loved him and came to this earth. So for her, it's very clear that this world is the center of redemptive activity. And God loves this world especially, even though it is fallen. And then I have an interesting discussion. Ellen White mentions Thomas Paine by name, but in a different context, because Paine had been channeled through a spiritualist, and she's responding to that, but I won't have time to get into that. Now we come to the great controversy, where I want to spend the most time on. The great controversy, or cosmic conflict concept, is the organizing theme in Ellen White's writings, the meta-narrative arc over all her literary corpus, as all of us who study Ellen White know, and this was just brought out in the last paper in response, very, very effectively and insightfully. And this is what makes her concept of plurality unique and distinct to her. The other writers had bits and pieces of it, but they never brought it together into a full picture like she did. Her most intentional, consistent expression of this theme occurs, of course, in the Conflict of the Age series. As we all know, Patriarchs and Prophets, Prophets to King, Desire of Ages, Acts of the Apostles, and the Great Controversy. Written during the last 2 decades of her life, these 5 books cover the story of the Great Controversy over God's character as expressed in his law, from Lucifer's rebellion in heaven to the earth made new and all things restored in Christ. They function as the theological framework for everything she wrote, including her plurality of inhabited worlds statements. The other pluralist statements outside of the series, spread throughout her writings, plug into this theological framework. And as will be shown in this section, the purpose of her statements on plurality of worlds was to help her readers understand the cosmic issues at stake in the great controversy, to enlarge their view of Christ's atonement, and to show the great interest and investment of all the unfallen worlds in the outcome of Christ's redemptive work on this planet. That is to say, her statements on plurality of worlds is interconnected with these larger theological themes, namely the overarching theme of the great controversy. The pluralist terms White used most are universe and worlds. Universe occurs about 1,300 times in various pluralist contexts, such as all the universe, entire universe, whole universe. Worlds occurs about 400 times in the following anterior and posterior, with the following anterior and posterior word combinations: other worlds, unfallen worlds, worlds unfallen, all the worlds, and of course just worlds in a pluralist context. She also used the term intelligencies in the following ways: intelligencies of other worlds, sinless intelligencies, and created intelligencies. There are others, of course. These are the main ones. These pluralist terms form the backdrop for the interconnected themes in her overarching great controversy worldview, such as God's government, his law, character, love, justice, mercy, freedom, wisdom, and the redemptive work of Christ. The material is quite extensive, and obviously I can't deal with it all here. So I just hit the essence of it. And I'm going to intersperse her writings without quote unquote, and I have my own transition sentences throughout. But much of it is her statements. God's government included not only the inhabitants of heaven, but all the worlds that he had created, she explained. And Satan thought that if he could carry the angels of heaven with him in rebellion, he could carry also the other worlds. This statement occurred twice in the Conflict of the Age series, and set forth the constituents of God's government, and takes the reader back to the beginning of Satan's strategy in the great controversy. And the concept, by the way, of God's government is not found at all in the other writers, although they use terms that are slightly similar. God's law, his character, his justice are the foundation of his government, and Satan focused his energies on discrediting God's way of dealing with the universe. He misrepresented his plan of government before the angels, claiming that God was not just in laying laws and rules upon the inhabitants of heaven. and that in requiring submission and obedience from his creatures, he was seeking merely the exaltation of himself. Thus, it must be demonstrated before the inhabitants of heaven, as well as all the worlds, that God's government was just, his law perfect. Satan made it appear that he himself was seeking to promote the good of the universe. The true character of the usurper and his real object must be understood by all. But he must have time to manifest himself by his wicked works. It was necessary that his charges against the divine administration be demonstrated as false. The whole universe must see the deceiver unmasked. These are themes that you don't find in any of the other pluralist writers. So God in his infinite wisdom did not destroy Satan. The inhabitants of heaven and of other worlds, being unprepared to comprehend the nature and consequences of sin, could not then have seen the justice and mercy of God in the destruction of Satan. And she goes on with that theme about the heavenly universe watching and not prepared for annihilation of Satan and sin in the beginning. And she goes, then I'm going to shift to the creation of the earth. But let me cite a statement from education that is quite instructive. For what, this is the education, page 308, for what was the great controversy permitted to continue throughout the ages? Why was it that Satan's existence was not cut short at the outset of his rebellion? It was that the universe might be convinced of God's justice in his dealing with evil, that sin might receive eternal condemnation. At the creation of the earth with its new and distinct order of beings, the entire universe took a deep and joyful interest. Of course, and Satan, of course, focused his attack against God on this new planet and its new inhabitants, Adam and Eve. And of course, we know he deceived them into sin. Then you have the wonderful promise of Genesis 3:15, the gospel promise of a Messiah to come. And then it's interesting. I'm going to pick it up here. White is thus careful to inform her readers that the other worlds watched the controversy with interest. It was the marvel of all the universe that Christ should humble himself to save fallen man. This is once the gospel was presented, and in Genesis 3:15 and onward. She emphasized that he who had passed from star to star, from world to world, superintending all by his providence, supplying the needs of every order of being in his vast creation, that he should consent to leave his glory and take upon himself human nature, was a mystery which the sinless intelligences of other world desired to understand. In this sense, the plan of redemption had yet a broader and deeper purpose than the salvation of man. It was to vindicate the character of God before the universe. And I found interestingly in my research that many writers about extraterrestrials and theology, when they quote Ellen White, this is the statement that they are drawn to and they seem to quote often. As a witness to the controversy, the unfallen worlds especially followed the closing scenes of the conflict. They viewed with grief and amazement Christ hanging upon the cross, and thus the character of Satan was clearly revealed both to the angels and to the unfallen worlds. This aspect of the other worlds watching the controversy, which is unique to Ellen White, transpire on this planet, is a significant part of White's pluralist thought. The themes of the great controversy, atonement, and other worlds tend to converge in her thought. Why did the inhabitants of the unfallen worlds watch with such intense interest the struggle between the Prince of Life and the Prince of Darkness? Because the issues at stake, such as God's character as ruler of the universe, his law, his justice, his love, his self-sacrificing spirit, his way of dealing with sin and Satan. The result of the conflict had a bearing on the future of all the worlds, and every step that Christ took in the path of humiliation was watched by them with deep interest. Christ's death on the cross became the turning point for the angels and the unfallen worlds. In the following broad sweeping statement, White sets forth the impact of the cross in the universe and the great controversy. When Christ died on the cross, Satan's death knell was sounded. His deceptions were narrowly watched by the inhabitants of other worlds, of the unfallen worlds, as he in disguise worked in such a way that he thought he could not possibly be detected. But he was left to follow his own course, to condemn himself by his own deeds. And before the cross of Calvary, he stood revealed in his true character. When Christ cried out, "It is finished," the unfallen worlds were made secure. For them, the battle was fought and the victory won. Henceforth, Satan had no place in the affections of the universe. The argument he had brought forward that self-denial was impossible with God and therefore unjustly required from his created intelligences was forever answered. Satan's claims were forever set aside. The heavenly universe was secured in eternal allegiance. In White's mind, then, the cross was a close of probation for Satan's influence throughout the universe. He had been proven a liar and thus, quote, the last link of sympathy between Satan and the heavenly world was broken. Christ vindicated the character of God in his life and death before the universe, and in doing so had preserved the allegiance of the universe. And she says, the arm that raised the human family from ruin, which Satan had brought upon the race through his temptations, is the arm which has preserved the inhabitants of other worlds from sin. Because of Christ's redemptive work for this world, the angels of the unfallen worlds have decided in favor of God's government that they will remain loyal to him forever. White then asserts Christ is mediating in behalf of man, and the order of unseen worlds is also preserved by his mediatorial work. Now, one other writer, Timothy Dwight, mentions the mediatorial work of Christ in relationship to the other worlds. Most interesting. In a similar way, but never puts the full picture together that Ellen White does in terms of the cosmic conflict. One can detect in her discussion of the unfallen worlds in relation to Christ's death aspects of the exemplary and governmental theories of atonement, whereas for sinful humankind, she emphasized the penal substitutionary model of atonement. This is a subject certainly worthy of more discussion, but for this paper, it's enough to say that White would not agree with any concept of multiple incarnations for extraterrestrials, which is a big part of the discussion today. If we ever make contact and did sin reach the universe and so forth. The unfallen worlds, quote, who had not sinned, needed not the application of Christ's blood, but they did need to be made secure from Satan's power. And she goes on to say that, here's an interesting statement, the death of Christ upon the cross made sure the destruction of him who has the power of death, who is the originator of sin. When Satan is destroyed, there will be none to tempt to evil. The atonement will never need to be repeated. And there will be no danger of another rebellion in the universe of God. Now, my time is really short. I want to just interact briefly with some of the other authors. Chalmers acknowledged a conflict between good and evil. You read Chalmers, you think, wow, he's very similar to Ellen White, but never pulls the full picture together, namely because he's not really sure if sin has reached the universe or not. He goes back and forth in his statements. Andrew Fuller, however, that's my timer telling me my time's up. Sorry. But let me go on just another moment, if you will. Andrew Fuller, he speaks of at the end of the plan of redemption, he interestingly says that our earth will be reunited with the holy empire of God. And evangelical Andrew Leach, he says that the work of redemption, when it's complete, he says Calvary was not only to save man, but to reunite all the spiritual family of God. So there's some interesting bits and pieces of Ellen White's ideas with these writers, but she clearly is set apart with her view of the great controversy. And one final aspect that sets her apart also is in the eschatological setting of the millennium, Satan is bound geographically to the millennium. Prior to that, he's able to access the other worlds, but he's lost his influence, so he's figuratively cast down. That's another aspect that's very unique. If you will allow me just another minute or two to wrap up my conclusion now. This paper has demonstrated that the purpose of Ellen White's theological pluralism was to set forth her readers the issues in the great controversy between Christ and Satan, to clarify the cosmic impact of Christ's redeeming work on earth, and to show how the entire unfallen universe is invested in the outcome of the controversy. It is also demonstrated that although White's pluralism had several similarities with the Calvinist theological pluralist of her day, she set forth an original and innovative pluralism rooted in the soteriological and eschatological framework of her great controversy theme. The unique features of Ellen White's plurality of inhabited worlds can be summarized in 10 points. 1, the great controversy meta-narrative is the framework for her understanding of the unfallen worlds in the universe. 2, God did not destroy Satan in the beginning of his rebellion, but allowed him to reveal to the universe his true character. 3, the plan of redemption involved not only this fallen world, but all the unfallen worlds throughout the universe. 4, the unfallen worlds are watching with the greatest interest the great controversy transpiring on this world. 5, the unfallen worlds watch with intense interest the events in the life of Christ, and especially his death on the cross. 6, through Christ's sacrifice on the cross, the unfallen worlds discovered Satan's true character. 7, Satan lost all sympathy in the universe and all influence with the unfallen worlds after the cross. 8, Satan will be bound to earth during the millennium and thus cannot physically travel to the other worlds anymore. And 9, Christ vindicated the character of God in his death on the cross and showed that the foundation of God's government is love, mercy, and justice. And 10, the resolution of the great controversy brings a fresh, new understanding of God's character and his government to the entire universe, and rebellion will never rise again. These points collectively represent the pluralist picture in Ellen White's mind. The other pluralist writers who shared similar ideas presented only part of a picture. Their reflection on the starry heavens above inspired them with various theological applications, and they attempted to present as best they could pieces here and there of a pluralist puzzle. Based on her visions, Ellen White put together all the theological pieces of a pluralist puzzle and created a picture of what she understood as reality in the universe. There's no evidence that Ellen White copied or borrowed any words or phrases from her contemporary pluralists. As documented above, parallel ideas can be found through Ellen White and the evangelical pluralist, but the tapestry that weaves White's pluralist statements together, the great controversy theme, is detailed enough and consistent enough so that it stands as an exceptional presentation of Christian pluralist thought. It is comparable with the spiritualists, the Mormons, the evangelicals, but in the end is unique and original to Ellen White. My final paragraph. At the end of her work, her book, The Great Controversy, the grand conclusion to the Conflict of the Age series, Ellen White described in moving language how the redeemed will visit the other worlds. Worlds that thrilled with sorrow at the spectacle of human woe and rang with songs of gladness at the tidings of a ransomed soul. With the plan of redemption complete, the children of earth enter into the joy and wisdom of unfallen beings and share the treasures of knowledge and understanding gained through ages upon ages in contemplation of God's handiwork. With this, she came full circle from her 1849 visionary encounter with another world some 60 years earlier, when she was promised that, if faithful, she would one day have the joy of visiting other worlds in the universe of God. For Ellen White, then, pluralism was indeed a promise of joy and discovery throughout eternity. Into paper.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lake, for your presentation on Plurality of Unfallen World, Ellen White, and Extraterrestrial. It was indeed a fascinating presentation, a lot of questions, and a lot of points. So at this moment, we're going to have a 10-minute response from Dr. Abner Hernandez. So until let's say 11:55, 11:59, and after that we'll have a 5-minute response from Dr. Lake. So Dr. Abner Hernandez is an assistant professor of church history at Southern Adventist Theological Seminary at Andrews University. He graduated with his PhD in religion, church history, and systematic theology from Andrews University. His dissertation investigated the doctrine of prevenient grace in Jacobus Arminius theology. Please welcome now Dr. Abner Hernandez. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to respond to the very good paper of Dr. Lake. I am really honored to have the opportunity to respond to this very good work. I would like to share my response so you can follow me in the reading of some of the ideas I would like to share with Dr. Lake and with all the participants in this morning. Professor Jud Lake's contribution to our 2022 Ellen G. White's annual symposium is fascinating. At least in modernity, humans has a history of exploring through fiction, religion, and science the probable existence of life beyond the boundaries of our blue planet Earth. Any documentary, movie, book, or paper, like the one this morning, related to extraterrestrial life immediately caught the attention of most people. So we are very interested in this topic this morning from Dr. Lake. Lake's thesis is that the idea of plurality of the unfallen worlds in the writing of Ellen G. White should be understood by taking into account her pluralist context and the divine revelation she received. He concludes that while I agree with several Christian pluralists of her time, still she framed her ideas in the great controversy meta-narrative to advance specific theological understandings about God, God's enemy, creation, sin, and salvation. Lake successfully provides arguments and historical evidence showing the widespread belief that the Earth is not the only inhabited planet of God's created order. Indeed, the supporting pieces of evidence gives the reader the sensation of being a witness to a rare historical occurrence. According to the paper, except for John Wesley, Christian, deist, spiritualists, and non-Christian scientists, or maybe natural philosophers at the time, agree that multiple inhabited worlds exist. Therefore, it is not rare that Ellen G. White held similar perspectives. She was commonly aware of her time's developments in knowledge, social and political issues, and religious ideas. Like other topics, however, Lake argues that White used the knowledge acquired from different sources in her context and refined by revelation with a completely different intention than her fellow contemporaries. The purpose of White's ideas on the plurality of the worlds inhabited by unfallen beings was theological. So it was not a speculative curiosity that motivated her. In my view, some of the most important theological ideas that White advanced was limiting the presence of the sinful condition on the planet Earth. In establishing this difference between White and some of her contemporaries, the paper offers one of the most solid contributions on the topic. There are some questions that Lake's work may raise in the reader's mind. Lake states that White assumed the Copernican heliocentric model of the universe. What was the meaning of universe, entire universe, and whole universe for White? Did White's concept about the universe develop? I think that the paper could potentially benefit the readers by defining these concepts in White writing specifically. Another aspect that raises some question is the necessity and role of the atonement for the unfallen worlds. I think that this is not completely developed in the paper, but I think that is a very interesting topic from a theological perspective. One of the paper conclusions is that the plan of salvation involves the unfallen worlds. There are no specific arguments in the paper to support this conclusion, but the suggestions that the atonement benefited the unfallen worlds in an exemplary and governmental way. Why did the unfallen worlds need the application of the atonement as an example and government? Was the death of Christ necessary to preserve the integrity of the unfallen worlds? I agree with the author that these ideas need further discussion, although they are not integral to the main arguments of this work. Another interesting question that I noticed, and maybe this is just my curiosity here, to explore is related to Thomas Paine pointedly asking, are we supposed that every word in the boundless creation had an Eve, an apple, serpent, and a redeemer? And my question is, did Ellen G. White positively answer to this question by stating that she visited and saw in an inhabited world 2 trees, but of one they could not eat? So implying the presence of a intelligent being, a tempter, and also a tree of knowledge and so on, like in Genesis 3. There is one crucial tension in the paper that needs attention and clarification. The tension, in my perspective, between context and revelation. Throughout the text, Lake gravitates between the possibility of contextual influence versus the uniqueness of revelatory knowledge. as the sources of wide plurality of the words. I acknowledge as a historian the difficulty of establishing unambiguous historical influence from one thinker to another. However, the paper states that the idea of plurality of words was readily available in books, newspapers, and almanacs, and most probably than not, in oral sources to everyone living in that historical context in North America. At the same time, it assumes that White needed to read specific books, Proctor, Chambers, and other authors to establish distinct contextual influence. As a reader here, I see the meaningful differences between White and the spiritualist and Smith on the topic. However, her conceptualization seemed very close to the Christian theologians in intention and content. If this perception is correct, I will suggest that the author explores some arguments or adds other threads of evidence to release this tension that I find. Maybe her visions did not provide her with a unique intention and content about the plurality of the unfallen words. Still, the visions, they did provide correct perspectives to the ungranted concepts that abounded in her time and culture. I really and greatly appreciate Dr. Jud Lake's excellent and exciting contribution to this topic. By the way, I don't know the rest of you participating this morning, but I think that this is the first research I have read ever on this idea in Ellen G. White. So I significantly learned from his work. So I look forward to reading more about these ideas from his pen. Thank you very much, Dr. Lake. Thank you very much, everyone, for listening to my answer this morning.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hernandez. Excellent response. And thank you for your kind words, but especially for your critique and suggesting some of these issues that need more attention. Yes, I guess your last comment there, I suppose I've gone boldly where no one has gone before, and pun intended there, in this subject matter, but it certainly needs attention. And you expressed the tensions you expressed. I appreciate that so much because I felt some of these tensions too once I finished the paper, and I was pulling so much together. And as I said at the beginning, the challenge is what to leave out. These issues that you raised, I think, are so important, particularly the one with Revelation and her reading. Of course, I'm just throwing that out there as a possibility. I don't know. I don't think we know if she read at all from the other material or not. I am convicted, as I know you are, that she read, that she mainly got the information from revisions, and that it could be that she never read Proctor at all. And her broadening of her pluralist language just came from her own visionary experience as she saw more and more. But some of the language, maybe stars and systems, maybe she had, I'm sure that because as common as it was, maybe she had read some of that material and picked up some of the language. But I'm convinced that her basic plurality comes from her visions. It's revelation without question. But again, that goes back to this whole issue of literary borrowing and the common and the sacred mixed together. Jerry Moon and I explore this in our article in the encyclopedia about the intersection of human sources with visionary source and so forth, and how all that it mingles together. But in the end, the final product is the inspired message that God wants to get across. And so I certainly agree with you. That needs more discussion in the paper. It's just, I left so much out, and this is more of a giving that broad landscape, more of a foundational paper that sets forth the issues that should be addressed later on, particularly the issue of multiple incarnations. And if sin, and that's where Ellen White is so clear for us, that sin does not reside on this, sin resides only on this planet and not in the universe. That idea, that presupposition about sin is the heart of the contemporary debate going on today. And it would be fascinating. The first attempt I made in the paper, I wrote part of it out. It was all dealing with the contemporary issues. And C.S. Lewis as well explores some themes that are very similar to Ellen White. I will confess, I plan to write a book on this subject. And there'll be an entire chapter on Ellen White and C.S. Lewis and some of the issues that you raise that need attention. I definitely feel the need to explore those. So thank you for pointing that out. And I look forward to a hard copy of your insights, and I will definitely incorporate those.
Thank you, Dr. Lake. God bless you.
And you too.
Thank you to you all who chose to participate in this year's symposium. And a big thank you to Dr. Williams, Dr. Blue, Dr. Lake, and Dr. Hernandez for their willingness to share their knowledge on these subjects. It's not over yet. Although we should not live by bread alone, it does not mean that we should not have any. So at this moment, we're going to take our lunch break and we will resume at 1:30. So enjoy and hope to see you soon, God willing.